Like to call to order the Town of Bowling Green special meeting. Today is Thursday, February 27th, 2025. It is 5 p.m. Make establish a quorum. Mr. White.
I am here.
Ms. Davis. Here. Mr. Webb.
Here.
Mr. Stork.
Here.
Mr. Hageman.
Here.
Mr. Coyle. Here. I was thinking of Mr. Chanel, Dr. Chanel, he is not here. 6 of our 7 council persons are present. We do have a quorum. Would everyone please stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we are here tonight for in new business, and we will be listening to a presentation from Robinson Farmer Cox and Associates about our fiscal year 2022 audit. Welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to meet with you all this evening, go over the results of our audit for the year ended June 30th, 2022. The main byproduct of our audit process is our independent auditors' reports or opinions. For the town of Bowling Green for fiscal year 2022, we issued 2 auditor type reports. The first of which is the independent auditor's report itself. And that report is on the numbers in the financial statements. The accounting legalese is that the town received an unmodified opinion, a report in layman's terms. That's a clean report on the actual numbers in the financial statements, which is what you're looking for there. For the second report that shows up in the financial statements for Bowling Green, which is an auditor type report, that's called the Government Auditing Standards Report, or sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the Yellow Book Report. And that report is on internal controls and compliance related matters. And in that report, we do notate any material weaknesses in controls, significant deficiencies in controls. We did have a material weakness for material journal entries that were required. If those of you that were here last summer when I presented the 21 report will note we had the same weakness. So it's the same issue that, still the town's working really hard to get caught up on their finances and their audits. And 2022, as I mentioned, it might be when I spoke last summer on 21, was extremely difficult because there was 2 different accounting systems that went into the fiscal year 22. There was a change in accounting system in the middle, and the town staff had to work to put together the trial balance in a complete fashion that included all the activity for the entire fiscal year. And in doing so, have something that was a basis that we could start our audit process for and work through that. They still were in doing so. That was mainly a cash basis, essentially trial balance that was able to be pulled together out of those accounting systems by staff, and we had to do a lot of work to prepare adjustments to get that to the accrual basis that had to be required. So we had, again, that material weakness as one report item for that government auditing standards report that we did notate. Again, that was very similar to what we reported for fiscal year 21, and then going into the fiscal year 22 audit, we knew that was going to be as difficult as 21, or maybe more so because of the accounting system issues. We also issue 2 communication type items. We issued a letter to those charged with governance, which is our standard communication at the end of the audit process. It notes some of the significant accounting estimates that each government has to use in preparing the financial statements. It mentions that things like that the management of the town of Bowling Green signed the representation letter, and things of that nature. It does highlight the adjustments that were needed during the audit process, and that notate in that paragraph is kind of the only item outside of the norm as far as like the standard language of communication items, as we did notate that, town did all the adjustments that we proposed, and those were referenced in our material weakness 2024 or 22-001. And then secondly, as we normally do, we had some management letter comments, which are things that are recommendations for improvements in internal controls, which do not rise to the level of a material weakness or significant deficiency, but which are worth bringing to management's attention. So this year we had a few items. We had some outstanding checks that were over the 1 year outstanding that need to be remitted to the state. We had sales tax, but we got a couple of issues that we notated last year that obviously, because this was fiscal year 22, we noted these things in 21, but fiscal year 22 is already come and gone. Couldn't necessarily have fixed those in 22 when 22 was already passed. So sales tax and some items related to refunds payable, deposit liability accounts, and then finally 941s. There was some missing documentation for 941s, and then at least one quarter that was filed significantly late. I think a couple quarters were significantly late in being filed. So we did have those couple items that we noted in that management letter. And then just a few financial highlights. I'm not going to get too deep into the financial highlights. When you have a chance to look over the financial statements, if you have any questions that staff can't address and they need to reach out to me, they're welcome to reach out to me for any explanations on anything related to the financial statements once you get a chance to kind of dig through those. But as you're aware, for local governments, there are two different bases of accounting that get reported by local government entities, and that's number one, the full accrual basis of accounting, and that basis includes all of your long-term assets, your buildings and things like that, and then all of your long-term liabilities, which are not only actual loans that you may have, but things like pension liabilities through the VRS system, other post-employment benefits, and things of that nature. And so from that standpoint, when you take all the assets and all the liabilities, the residual or the difference in the two, the retained earnings essentially is referred to in that basis of accounting as net position. And the town had a total net position for governmental activities, which is basically your general fund, your capital monies. The total net position for those funds was $725,209. Which was an increase of $291,877 from June 30th, 21 to June 30th, 22. Business type activities, which is your water and sewer operations, they're, they call this business type because you operate them more like a business where you have service charges based on usage, etc. And for the business type activities for water and sewer, you had a total net position of $4.6 million, and that was a decrease of $126,292. Then the other basis that you really use most frequently in local governments is the modified accrual basis, because your general fund, and when you do budget and things like that, you're working on the general fund modified accrual basis where you speak of fund balance. And so your residual in the modified accrual basis, or your retained earnings, essentially your difference between your assets and liabilities, is fund balance. So for June 30th, 2022, the fund balance of the general fund was $618,267, and out of that fund balance, $607,327 was unassigned fund balance, while there was some non-spendable fund balance that made up the difference in those two figures. The general fund balance, that figure that I just referenced, was an increase of $337,665 from June 30, 2021 to 22. And then from a budgetary standpoint, the revenues for fiscal year 22 were over budget by $341,673. So more revenue came in than what was budgeted, primarily in the local taxes area. Things like business licenses, meal tax, things of that nature. And then, the expenditures were just a little bit over budget by about 31,000. So the net, there was a net positive variance of the budget to actual, between revenues and expenditures, leading to that increase in your overall fund balance for the general fund. So those are just a couple of highlights, that I wanted to share with you. I apologize for some miscommunication on my part. I have sent the final PDF documents, to the town, but I did not bring any hard copies with me. And, so once you get a chance to review those, if you do have any questions, like I said, on any of these findings or on the financial statements themselves, feel free to ask, staff to reach out to me for any additional clarifications. But with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the town has about the fiscal year 22 audit.
I'll share this email that to you all, and I'll get that posted on the website. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Once you all accept it, I'll have to submit over to USDA as quickly as possible tomorrow, so that they can have that. They've already inquired about our status on 23 and 24, so we're going to try to continue to move as quickly as possible.
So the overage in expenditures, how much is that?
31,503.
Spread a month to month a little bit?
So let me take a quick look here. It was mainly in the general government administration, and I think it was related to some of the COVID-related expenditures that were not included in the initial budget, and may not have had a subsequent amendment to budget for what was going to actually be used in fiscal year 21.
And then the 300,000 above revenue was mostly meals tax?
221,282 out of that was other local taxes, and then to drill down on that a little bit more, business licenses were over budget by 46,000, and bank stock tax was actually over by $89,000. Restaurant and meals tax was also over by 76,000. So the three of those made up probably about 90% of that $221,000 of positive budgetary variance. Most of your other budgetary revenue to actual, most of your other categories of major revenues were very close in line with budget. Federal revenue was over budget, and that's kind of, again, related to that's kind of offsets that expense item, is that there was 119,000 of federal revenue over what was budgeted initially in the general fund for federal revenue.
So India, are they helping us with 23, 24?
I'll defer to Andrew on my question at the moment.
I think we'll have to have some discussions on that, related to what, how the town would like to proceed, with that, so.
So how long did 22 take?
So 22, so we presented 21 in, I want to say June of 2024. So from, we did not start anything on 22 until September or the very latest part of August. And so part of the delay, there was an understanding that the town was going to engage with someone to do audit prep. That didn't work out, so we kind of had to be pulled back in to do a little bit more than we had anticipated. And then there was another delay that started from when we came and did a little bit of work in early September, and then had to kind of pass back to the town that the trial balance I referenced earlier wasn't at a point where we could really just jump off. From when we got that resolved, it was resolved in November, but it came at a time that is a really difficult time for us and what we already had on our schedule. So we came back in December, mid to late December, and did some on-site. And so from that point to today, was about a little less than 2 months from getting, really to where we could really roll on the audit with the trial balance to having a final document. There was a couple delays along the way, meaning number one, we didn't start in from 21 into jumping into 22 for several months. And then when we came in and did a couple of days assessment, there were some things we could do, control testing and things of that nature that you don't necessarily have to have that hard trial balance for. And then we had to wait until we could get that information. So in total, we finished 21 in June, and we're finished 22 here in February.
To just add some context to that, I think when I came back, I think it was in July after we finished the 21, we had hoped to engage with Rutherford Moss. They had a pretty tight window in order for us to try to get them the information that they needed, and that kind of coincided with that BAI system crash, and we weren't able to get some of the data out of there that they needed. Once we missed their window, we then kind of had to pivot to be able to get this. And as he mentioned, there were some hiccups along the way as related to getting the information between both systems and trying to patch together kind of records that they could really use and start with. And as he mentioned, they were back on site on December 18th, right between the holiday season, so that we could kind of push to get this done. But because they came on in, I think, late August, we started work right after the 21 was presented. So they had their timeline, but for us and internal, we've basically been pushing pretty much just the day that they presented the day after. So I would say on average, it's taking us for something like this in between the systems, we're talking, low in 6 months, high in 8 months for that amount of work. And that was without pre-auditors. So that was because we had a finance director on staff, and then Ms. Morgan continued her work in terms of helping kind of backfilling that pre-audit. So that was essentially the staff that we had on hand, and one other person helped us with pre-audit. So if we're able to re-engage the pre-audit firm, if I'm able to recruit a new finance director, we can hopefully get back on track, but those are things that are outside of my control.
You had referenced that there were 2 types of small town accounting. The first one was full accrual, and then you listed things underneath. What's the second one?
The second one was modified accrual basis, and that is, some people will call it the fund balance basis of accounting. It's used for your water and sewer is always on the full accrual, because that's how business it's very similar to what you'd see in a business setting or in a nonprofit setting. The fund balance, the modified accrual is very unique to governments, and for like general fund, capital project fund, if you happen to have special revenue funds, those types of funds where you don't include as your assets, you don't have your buildings and things of that nature. You have your near-term assets, things basically due to the town within 1 year, or things that you have on hand, and you have your near-term liabilities. So accounts payable, accrued payroll, things of that nature that are due in near term, but you don't have things like pension liabilities. If you happen to have like a note payable, it would not be considered a liability on that modified accrual basis. And so when you guys budget for the general fund, that's talking about fund balance, and that's on that basis where you're projecting out your budget. You're always doing that in line with thinking about fund balance and whether the impact of that budget is going to add to fund balance, decrease the fund balance. And so the modified accrual basis is the one that, you use more in the governance role, except obviously the water and sewer is a unique animal that is on the full accrual all the time.
In regard to the 941s, kind of sticking in my craw, what was the total amount of those not filed, 941? And was it more than 21 not being filed?
I do not have that information other than to say, yes, I think there were more issues in 22 with the 941 filings than there were in fiscal year 21, but India may have a little bit more information on that.
Based on what we've seen, the issues that arose in 22 also were persistent in 21. I think there may be some differences in when they arrived in terms of findings on the management letter, but looks like that there weren't any filings in 2021, none in 2022, none in 2023. So we worked with a consultant who's helped us with that this year. They're all caught up and we've been caught up on 2024. We received a letter from the IRS basically acknowledging that fact about a week ago that we have to respond to. As it relates to findings or any fees associated with those late filings, I don't have an answer to that yet, but we are following up. But as of now, we're all caught up on the 941s. So,
And deposits were made, India.
yes.
It was just that the forms were not filed, so the money was there, and from my experience on the for-profit business standpoint, they very well will send you penalties, interest. You can try to have those abated. How successful, you'll be in that, I can't answer that, but occasionally that issue arises where, a business has sent in their filings, but oftentimes due to change in finance staff or something of that nature, the actual form didn't get filed. So, the one positive is the deposits to the federal tax system, payroll taxes were made.
And the consultant that's helping us with that is a former IRS employee, so we're hoping that we'll have some decent results in the negotiations that we need to have moving forward.
They tend to be somewhat more sympathetic to nonprofits and governments in those situations as far as abatements and things of that nature.
Any more questions from council?
I've got one. I don't remember what all these installments were. Is there an impact on those revenues and everything from the old ARPA installments?
Yeah, so in 2022, so the first bucket was what they called CRF. That money that was CARES in nature from the initial legislation, that was spent by the end of 21 and revenue recognized. At the end of 2022, during June 30, 2022, the town spent and recognized 119,424 of ARPA the Recovery Act monies. At the end of 22, the town still had, let me find the figure for you here, about 490,000 of ARPA money that had not been expended and then subsequently recognized. And I believe there was an extra tranche that was received after June 30th, 2022 that the town also can recognize in 23 and 24. I believe the town had, indicated that they would use a revenue replacement that while there was some specific projects that you may use it for, you also check the box to say that you qualified and we want to be eligible for the revenue replacement, in which case it can be used for any general governmental services, except like paying a debt service and things of that nature. So I believe in 23 and 24, there'll be a significant amount of ARPA funds that will be recognized on the revenue side.
Quite a bit. I guess in 24 with that last sewer issue, I think it was. Yeah, I couldn't remember the time when they all were which year because it's been a little bit, but since that was one-time money, I was curious on the impact when you say you had a nice overhead.
Yeah, 22 was about 100. Wasn't a huge impact. I think there will be some more to come. Like I said, there was 490,000 that was sitting in what we call unearned revenue. So it wasn't part of that fund balance. You recognize the revenue as you match it up with qualifying expenditures. And so you have that, plus I think one more tranche of money.
Sure. Where I'm going with it is I remember when we were doing the budget back then, I don't have this in front of me to see, where all your progress and everything are, but, at that time, it was being reflected in our revenues. So, I'm just trying to track with, you said we were up 300, what?
It was like 330,000.
Okay, so would it be fair to, in my mind, going through, we're patting myself on the back too much, subtract that 120 we got from the government
Yeah.
one time to say, okay, we did this good.
Yes. So what they call in evaluating a company, in normalizing, normalize your financial statements. So you take out kind of if you're looking at Microsoft stock and they had something, it was more of a one-time item, you kind of, normalize them and pull those and exclude those. So if you were to go through that exercise, then you'd pull about 120,000 out of there, and so you'd have about 180, or no, about 110,000 or so, or 210,000 that was through normal budgetary revenue increases, which a lot of that again is derived from the local taxes.
That's great, thanks.
Any other questions from council? Any questions from staff?
No, other than I'd just like to thank Andrew and his team for their work. I know we're in a difficult space. We're pulling out of some of the difficult times, but I know these audits are very complex. I've been through, I don't know, 9 or 10 local government audits, and these are by far the worst I've ever been through. And I know you could probably say the same. So I'd like to thank you for your efforts in sticking around with us.
Yeah, these two have been some of our more difficult ones, but it certainly has been difficult on us. But the staff, staff has worked really hard to try to let us be able to get to where we can do our audit. The same thing I said for 21 is true of 22. I never made any promises coming into either of these audits that we have an unmodified opinion on the financials, that we have enough audit evidence to be able to opine on the material items of the financial statement. So it's a credit to town staff to be able to pull that together, as difficult as it was on both sides of the table of the process, to get to where we could do that, especially with the accounting system issue. So yeah,
Thank you very much.
thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
All right, we have no more business before this council. I would like to ask for a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
And a motion from Mr. Hoyt. Is there a second? Second. Second from Ms. Davis. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Meeting adjourned.